Hello, everybody, and welcome to week 11 of Stat Chasing. Had a really exciting week 10 to break down. We saw the emergence of a couple rookie running backs in Rashad White and Isaiah Pacheco. Justin Fields continued his domination of the NFL, and Justin Jefferson maybe made the best catch of all time in a thrilling game between the Vikings and the Bills. Connor, how are you doing? How was your week 10 for fantasy?
Um, pretty nondescript. I had a min cash or two in DFS. I had some solid scores in redacted, but nothing really that notable.
Yeah,
How about
I
you?
similar for me. I took the week off from DFS. Actually, I haven't been playing a ton of DFS this year. I've just been busy with other stuff and don't have time for it. But yeah, my sadly our season long stat chasing team is dead. So at least we don't have to worry about fab arguments anymore. But
Yeah. No stat chasing stream. Fab arguments bleeding onto our stream.
no, that team is dead. My other season long stuff's going okay, but yeah, I'm hopeful for best ball. Was a couple players that I had been drafting in a bunch of teams like Tony, Rashad White, Pollard. They had been sort of posting zeros for a while, and now those guys are starting to pick up. So I think overall, my portfolio for redacted is trending up, but you never know until you get to the playoffs. It's still multiple weeks away before we know which players are really gonna matter there. But
Yeah,
yeah,
I mean, right now I've got a 30% advance rate on in BBM, but like
mhm.
every one of those teams has either like Brees Hall or Trey Lance. So
Yeah,
it's that's a very weird feeling.
yeah. It's tough going through the teams, and yeah, I noticed a similar thing with a lot of my high scoring teams. I think I had fairly spread exposures, but Trey Lance was my highest owned quarterback at like 14%, I think. So that's frustrating. Um, but yeah, we'll see. I think with the amount of sort of like handcuff running backs I have in my teams, like I have a bunch of Donta Foreman, which has been fun. Maybe I can sort of get some of those zero RB or anchor RB teams through. But yeah, it was a fun NFL week to watch, and yeah, why don't we just start by breaking down the positions as we do
Yeah.
every
So
week?
we talked about this a little bit.
Mhm.
It sounds like you had a fun stream with Pat yesterday evening.
Yeah,
And I guess I maybe I'm forcing the issue a little bit too much here, but we were kind of talking. At least I noticed when looking at these charts, a lot of it is the same, um, and maybe a fresh angle would be to combine the approach of like, okay, we were using the resurrection before. Maybe we can use this to talk through some of the ADPs on the playoff format.
yeah, yeah. I like that. And I think, yeah, obviously in the playoff format for people who didn't catch it last night, this is underdogs. Wild their first tournament is called the way too early wild card, but essentially the structure of this tournament and the future playoff tournaments they're going to release is best ball in the NFL playoffs, and you like each round of the NFL playoffs is a round in the best ball tournament. So you first need to win the wild card weekend, then you need to win, the divisional round and so on. So teams, players on teams that are expected to advance really far, like the Bills, Chiefs, Vikings, Eagles, those players are obviously worth more than someone on the Bengals, just because the Bengals right now only have a 40% chance of making the playoffs according to 538. So it has that angle on top of it, but I like that as well, and I like that idea, Connor. As we go through some of these things, we can reference that ADP, which I'm sure is updating pretty sharply week to week there.
Right, day to day. It's
Yeah,
probably
sorry, day to day even. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, cool. So yeah, quarterback, like you said, I think this chart is the one that is the most stable. So don't have a ton to call out here. I think a few things that continue to stand out for me. Tua continues to be the most efficient quarterback in the NFL from an
two of the
adjusted,
chart breaker.
yeah, Tua the chart breaker from adjusted yards per attempt standpoint. So that's exciting. Looking going to the ADP for the best ball tournament on Underdog, Tua is going at ADP of 24, so that's like a late fourth round pick in this format, which is pretty good when compared to the other top guys. So I do like playing that tournament through Miami. Me and Pat touched on this last night, but it's gonna be very concentrated with Waddle and Tyreek. We actually saw them go a little bit away from the concentration this past week, but I think that was a bit of a fluke. The offense is highly concentrated. Tua has been very efficient. It's a good scheme there in Miami with just the fastest wide receivers in the league getting open with heavy concentrated targets towards them. So I like Tua. I like Miami. Yeah. Any thoughts there on the Dolphins or Tua?
So honestly, the Dolphins were the first team that I thought of when I started thinking about this, in that like likely to be undervalued, um, because it's hard to envision them making a deep run, but they're so concentrated that if they do, you almost know where you feel very strongly about where the points are going to come from. Um, but looking at your chart, the biggest surprise to me actually is the Seahawks, who now they're not 90% chance to make the playoffs, they're 79% chance to make the playoffs. But their earliest drafted guy is Kenneth Walker at 44 and a half. And Geno Smith is QB 12 in a 6th-round draft. So basically, rarely getting drafted. And then we see him in the good section of the chart. He's got some rushing yards. He also throws somewhat concentrated with their two, Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf. That seems like something that's going to fly under the radar, and it's definitely risky, not without risk, but can see that kind of like being a team that it can carry you. You're going to score points because you know, or you have a good feeling on who the points are going to come from.
Yeah, I like that with the Seahawks. In that division too, you really have the Cardinals and the Rams both falling off a cliff. So it's really going to be down to the Seahawks and the 49ers. 49ers are 5-4 right now. Seahawks sitting at 6-4. So there's definitely paths to them winning the division and getting a home playoff game as well. And also obviously a chance at the wild card. So I like the Seahawks for that format too. Agree with all your points and concentration. Other thing I'll add is, as you can see in the chart here, he adds a bit of rushing juice. He's up there in sort of the Burrow, Mahomes range in terms of rushing production. So that's pretty solid to tack that on to some solid passing stats as well.
Especially if you start off with a team likely to get a first-round bye.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a cheap stack you can throw on the end with Lockett and Metcalf, or throw Kenneth Walker in there if you need a running back.
Yeah, I
Yep.
like that. You make a bet that if you go in with the Chiefs and they get the first-round bye, that you got the Seahawks and concentrated offense there.
Yeah. Jumping around a little bit. This is less of a take for the fantasy playoffs, but I did want to talk about Kenny Pickett a little bit here. He really continues to struggle. He's the far left of this chart in adjusted yards per attempt. Now, again, that's driven by a very high interception to touchdown ratio, which is maybe somewhat fluky, but we do have a pretty big sample on Kenny Pickett now. So for maybe this is more of a take in Dynasty. I'm certainly not giving up on Kenny Pickett yet, but he hasn't really flashed much in a sample
Right.
so far. So
I'm with you. This is in Dynasty in Superflex. This is a great off ramp spot for Kenny Pickett, where he still put up games with points. He's showing some rushing upside, and in Superflex, you can likely get a pretty good return on him at this
Yeah.
point.
Yeah. If you're a contender that needs points, and you're looking for a forward-looking team, you can maybe deal Pickett for, I don't know. I'm not a dynasty expert, but like an older quarterback who's going to give you more production down the stretch, maybe a Brady plus something else, something along those lines. Or if you're trying to completely blow it up, you could maybe trade Pickett for a future pick as
Well,
well.
yeah. So Pat was talking about in the draft season that he was able to after Daniel Jones's rookie season, he was able to trade him for a bucket load of picks, and it's just because the quarterback position is so valuable. And so that's kind of like what I had in mind. In like teams even if they're not the best quarterback, if they're young, you think they're going to start for a while. They've got some rushing. They do tend to have some pretty good value.
Yeah. Great. And yeah, I'm with you there on the Pickett stuff. Last thing to call out, we talked about Justin Fields as the arbitrage Lamar Jackson. That continues to look good. The rushing production for Fields is just insane. He's now at 67 rushing yards per game. That's second only to Lamar. And it's really been skewed towards the back half of the year. Early in the season, they weren't having Fields rush much. So I think that's almost like the floor of, maybe that's too ambitious, but I'm thinking of like that 60 to 65 number is almost the floor of Fields rushing going
Right.
forward. He's shown like 100 plus rushing yards in back-to-back games, even up to 180 in one game. So I
I
don't
mean,
know.
he's an elite fantasy quarterback now.
Yeah. How many guys are you playing ahead of him? And say you picked up Fields off waivers, which is very possible.
Right.
How many guys are you still playing ahead of Fields, and who would they be?
I mean, next week, Josh Allen with that injury, I'm probably playing Justin Fields ahead of him. After that, I probably start Jalen Hurts over him. I think Fields and Mahomes. Now this might be a bit of a hot take. I think that's actually thinking through it. I think that's really close. Probably slight edge Mahomes over Fields, but
Yeah.
I was tempted to. I was actually tempted when I started that sentence to put Fields ahead of him, but I think you still want Mahomes slightly ahead. And
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
that's it, I think.
Yeah. That's fair. So yeah, I think for me, I'm maybe slightly less bullish, but I still think I would have him in my top five. I think I'd play Mahomes, Allen, Hurts, and Lamar, assuming that Andrews is back. I would play those four ahead of Fields. But
Even with the Allen injury.
yeah, I think I don't know. I heard some film breakdowns of the game. It looked to me like just poor decision making more than like an injury affecting Allen last week, and he still put up 20 fantasy points. So I guess I'm not that spooked on Allen with the injury. I just think he's still at 26 points per game for the season. Fields down at 20, so he's still I think you have to project Allen better. But like you said, I don't think it's crazy. Like there's an argument for Fields. What I'm probably doing if I have both of them is I'm trading Josh Allen for an elite running back or wide receiver and then starting Fields the rest of the way. Totally depends on what you can get as trade compensation, how much your league mates are willing to pay up for quarterback. But I would be selling if I have any of these top five guys, Mahomes, Allen, Lamar, Hurts, I'd be trying to trade them and ride Fields for the rest of the year. I did this in one league, a one quarterback league where I dealt Lamar for Tyler Lockett. It wasn't an amazing deal. I wish I could have gotten more for Lamar, but I was really struggling at wide receiver. I needed to get a win that week. and I'll start Lockett the rest of the way, and I feel fine with Fields replacing Jackson. So ideally, you can get like a little bit of a better player than that if you're dealing one of these elite quarterbacks, but sometimes that's just dependent on what your league mates are.
Yeah,
are
this
willing
is
to give
stat
up.
chasing, not negotiations trading.
Yeah, but I don't know. That's the type of move I'm trying to make. Trade if you got Fields off waivers and you have 2 elite quarterbacks now, trade the guy you drafted highly and ride with Fields, because I think that's the way you're gonna get the most bang for your buck.
So
Interesting
you
dynasty
get a question
question.
here of
Yeah,
dynasty Fields or Watson. This is Fields for me, and not close at all.
yeah,
I guess my rationale would just be age, and then also for Watson, you do have that. I hate talking about it like this, but it is just like a risk of like you see all these continuous like uh lawsuits come in,
yeah,
um, and it doesn't it feels right now like the door may be closed, but you've got that risk that suddenly it slams right back open, or flings right back open,
yeah.
and I guess, uh, uh, yeah, I think that's what I would say about that.
Yeah, I think I would go Fields too. Watson's only 27. I'm not quarterbacks can last a really long time. I'm not super worried about the age difference, I guess, from 23 to 27. I'm more on the concern of a legal risk down the line for Watson, or B, sometimes we just see when guys take extended periods off from football, they just don't come back. Like, who knows how Watson's training regimen has been since he's been gone. I haven't heard any reports that it's been bad, but clearly he's got some mental issues going on. I don't want to say too much more about that. I'm not a legal expert or anything, but I would treat Fields as the safer option, and I think he also has incredible upside as well. So I'd probably roll with Fields, but I
Yeah,
think it's
from the age point of view is that in three, so Watson's 27 now, Fields is 24. In 3 years, Watson will have a tree at the start of his age. And now I know you don't, it's not really like the stock market or whatever, but I do think that's like a pretty predictable point where the trade value is lower. Whereas when Fields is 27, I think from that point of view, his value is going to hold up a lot better in the trade market than Watson's will.
yeah, that's a fair point. I certainly defer to you on like dynasty trade markets. I don't have a ton of experience there.
I'm making it up.
Yeah, as we all are. Okay, cool. Let's move along here to running back. So for people following along on video, we're now looking at running back snaps and usage over the last 5 weeks, from week 6 to week 10. And we have all the running backs here who have greater than 40% routes or rush attempts as a percentage of their team's snaps. So it ranges from guys like Saquon Barkley, who are around 70% routes or rush attempts as a percent of his team snaps, all the way down to Jamal Williams, who is at around 40% routes and rush attempts as a percent of his team snaps. You can also see the expected points per game here below the names. See some guys like Eckler and Ramondre really pop there in terms of expected points, as well as fantasy points over expected per game. Joe Mixon is now the most efficient running back in fantasy points over expected per game, besides Tony Pollard, due to that 150 point.
It's week 6.
Yeah, that one explosion. So, anyways, I think there's a couple things that jump out to me here, starting with James Conner. This is a guy we haven't talked about for a while, but he came back last week immediately in an 80+% snap share role. The team also has released Benjamin, and I believe only gave the backup running back in last week's game, Keontae Ingram, a handful of carries. Ingram just had one carry to Connor's 21, just 2 routes run to Connor's 23. Connor had 65 of 68 snaps. So I think actually this chart is showing Connor's usage over maybe 2 games, and it would even look better if it was just last week's. I forget exactly when he went out with injury, but point being, I think they're ready to go back to James Conner in a full-time role like we saw last year when Chase Edmonds was hurt. So Connor is a guy that maybe there's a sneaky buy window on him right now. I'm trying to think of like who I'd send for Connor, like guys like Zeke, maybe Najee, guys maybe in that range, maybe even Fournette you consider with Rachaad White usage popping up. Maybe you can deal one of those guys and get Connor because the usage was really strong last week. Any thoughts on Connor or the Cardinals running back situation in general?
Yeah. So a thought for me main thought would be in terms of the playoff best ball. I don't think he's really in the conversation. We've got or 538 have Cardinals 12%.
Yeah,
probability of making the playoffs. They've not been very good this year. I think really you're thinking about James Conner in a situation of he's now got for the next couple of weeks, at least the next couple of weeks, he's got what we're perceiving to be a great opportunity share, and so he definitely seems like to be of the profile of if you really need help getting into the playoffs, he's a good potential target. I think with any of these guys, especially older running backs, you do want to be careful of like an overpay. And I don't think any of those players you mentioned represent that. But that is something that I would definitely be careful with. It's hard to in a vacuum. It's difficult to present possible trade candidates because you can't speak about every single league or format, but definitely I think definitely a target where if situationally you are one of those kind of cusp playoff teams and you need a bit of a push over the edge, definitely a good potential target to consider, but really do want to be price conscious.
Yeah, and he did have 22 point PPR points or so last week. So for the box score watchers, it might be tough to buy him. But I think my overall point would be is if someone's like thinking, oh, this is a James Conner sell high opportunity, and you can buy him at a reasonable price. Again, like hard to say exactly what that is aside from some of those names I threw out. I think Connor is a good buy right now. I think that the market perception of him is lower than it should be. Stephanie asked, "What about when Williams gets off IR?" I think he's not. Darrell Williams is not back due from IR for a couple weeks, and yeah, even then, I don't know. I'm not projecting Williams for a big role. Williams was running behind Eno for most of the year, and Eno just got cut, so I don't think the team thinks pretty highly of Darrell Williams. I would probably target Keontae Ingram as the most likely number 2 there. But
no, we're not trying to suggest that you pay a bell cow price for Connor either. I mean, if you do pay a bell cow price for Connor, well, then you have to be worried about Darrell. You have to be worried about Keontae.
Yeah.
But if you are price conscious, you can probably weather them getting solid workloads and him still scoring good points for you from being the lead committee back.
Yeah.
To me that's why you be price conscious, but he's definitely going to be the top dog now, it seems.
Yep. I agree with that. Okay, let's get to a couple. I want to talk through the Chiefs and the Bucks backfields because I think there's some interesting stuff going on there. So let's start with the Bucks. We have Fournette here at about a 60% snap roll. Again, this is over the past 5 weeks and about 15 expected points per game. We have Rashad White on the next chart at around a 35% rush route roll and 9 expected fantasy points per game. So, you know, it's not a perfect way to do it, but add those together 9 plus 15. We're talking about 25 or so expected fantasy points per game in this backfield between two guys. Do you have a lean on how would you sort of, if you're going to project this forward the rest of the way? It sounds like Fournette's injury is not going to be an issue. So let's assume right now both
Well,
these guys.
right now the beat reporters are talking about Rashad White being the starter going forward.
Yeah.
He was. I mean, he was the starter in the game just in week 10. He's got the age in his favor. Lenny historically has been a pretty inefficient back, so that's kind of like 15-10 in Lenny's favor. I would expect it to be 15-10 in Rashad White's favor going forward. And I think the biggest thing for this offense and these backs is that 25 expected points per game is pretty good. So there is enough expected points going around there for two fantasy viable backs. And my biggest take on Rashad White is that his value is a lot higher in redraft, probably to me anyway, than he would be in Dynasty. And my rationale for that is that he is an older rookie. Let me get his exact age. I think he's 24. And then one of the big reasons that it's so valuable, he's 23, but he turns 24 in January. One of the big things that this backfield is valuable is just from the goal line carries. Now, obviously, they've been lower this year, and also targets from Tom Brady.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if you think about it from a dynasty perspective, you got extreme risk of Brady retiring pretty soon, and then all that fantasy richness is no longer there. So would be pretty wary about that in Dynasty, but pretty excited about White for the rest of the year.
Yeah, I think I'm so like that 15-10 breakdown is probably about, yeah, I would say the median is something around anywhere from a full 50-50 split to a slight edge for Rashad White. I will call out that even though Rashad White officially did start the game in Munich, Fournette did outtouch him 14-11 before Fournette went down with injury. So it really was something close to a 50-50 split. Maybe even you could say a slight lean to Fournette. But with the injury, with how well Rashad White played after Fournette went down, I think that coming out of the bye, they're going to look to get Rashad White involved as the 1A. But I do expect, something closer to a 55-45, 60-40. I have to still give Fournette the edge on sort of carries from the 1 or 2 yard line, goal line carries. He's just the bigger back that the team probably trusts down there. But White certainly has more upside than Fournette because I think the likelihood of Fournette getting an 80% role with White healthy is almost zero now, where I could see a world where they move Fournette to a much smaller role if White really performs down the stretch. The other point I wanted to add to the playoff contests, I think the Bucks are one of the most exciting ways to attack the playoff contest right now. They have just an 83% chance of making the playoffs. So not guaranteed to make the playoffs, but I think that's keeping their prices really low. You have Brady going at pick 50. So that's close to a last round pick. in this format, second or third to last round. You have Mike Evans going in, let's see, pick 35, 39. So also pretty late. You have Godwin going even after that, pick 54, Rashad White, pick 60. So that's like last overall pick. You can really get away with stacking up the Bucks with 4 of your last, 6 picks or so. And I just think that the NFC this year is pretty wide open. You have the Eagles who just lost the Commanders last night. I mean, they're still looking really good, but I think their win-loss record is a little bit fluky. The Vikings, people have also made this point, but they've just won a ton of one-score games. I think their win-loss record is a little bit fluky, and I could just see the Bucks getting hot at the right time in the playoffs and making a bit of a run. Maybe it's my Tom Brady bias as growing up as a Pats fan, but we saw this with the Bucks back in.
Where do you live again?
Might be in New England, but yeah,
Really?
definitely.
I'm so surprised.
This is like Liam touting the Bills as a good pick if I tout Tom Brady and anything, but yeah, man, I don't know. I
mean, we just talked about the Seahawks at similar prices. I'm so excited to talk about Kenneth Walker with his big share of running back usage and price. So it'd probably be a little bit hypocritical of me not to at least be a little bit excited about Rashad White at pick 60 when I just said I think he's getting 15 expected points per game. And Chris Godwin at pick 55.
Yeah.
Those seem like pretty attractive prices. It's just so hard to envision for me to envision the Buccaneers being this team that makes a deep run, but it's week 10. We really don't know any of this stuff right now.
Yeah. If you remember back in 2020, I don't know their exact record at this point, but people were kind of ruling out the Bucks at around this time. Then, like their record was okay, but the offense was really struggling. Brady didn't look that great. I think people forget a little bit their 2020 run in the playoffs. I think came from a wild card spot or maybe a four seed with the division win. I wish I had this remembered right now, but another thing in favor of the Bucks is if they make the playoffs, it's almost certainly because they won the division, which gets them one home game in the playoffs. That division is so bad, they just have to beat out the Falcons, Saints, and Panthers. So I think that's like that. This 81% from 538, I'd almost be willing to say that should be even higher. I know there's the chance they miss and the Falcons go on some kind of weird run and make the playoffs, or maybe the Saints do, but I have a really hard time seeing them losing the division to the Falcons or Saints or Panthers. So
within that, they have a 15% probability to the Falcons, which kind of using probabilistic thinking seems reasonable. Like I think to get to the Buccaneers to 85-90, you got to push the Falcons close, like really close to 0. Which I'm a little bit low to do just because you do have to think probabilistically about these things.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I think I can see how they get to that 80% figure. The Bucks are only 5-5. A lot of weird stuff can happen in the NFL, but yeah, I feel good. The thing that matters, I think, is like say you compare them to the Seahawks or Giants. Those teams have similar odds for making the playoffs, but the Seahawks only have a 35% chance of winning the division, and the Giants only have a 12% chance of winning their division. So that's to say, if those teams make the playoffs, they're going to be going on the road more likely than not. Whereas if the Bucks make the playoffs, it's almost certainly because they won their division, and that's just a pretty big advantage.
Right.
Home field advantage is worth usually like three points on a betting line or whatever the common knowledge is there. So. That's
that's sort of reflected in your expected games total that you were talking about last night.
Yeah. Anyways, we've gone off on a tangent a bit. Any other running backs? We should talk about the Chiefs situation. Actually, we mentioned that at the top. me and Pat talked about this last night, but do you have a lean on? It seems pretty clear that CEH is out, and it's kind of down to McKinnon versus Pacheco. Let's say for just the regular season now, like if you're a team that wants to acquire one of these guys for your regular season fantasy leagues, do you have a lean between who you want, Pacheco versus McKinnon?
Um, Not really, no. I think they're both valuable, but it does seem like a situation where um Pacheco's getting the carries, McKinnon's getting he's getting the targets. I think McKinnon will be a factor close to the goal line, uh, especially with his passing, his receiving a bit chops.
Hmm.
So that's yeah, that one feels very close to 50-50 to me. Maybe slightly in Pacheco, but not overwhelming by any stretch.
Yeah, that that seems about right to me. I think for the regular season, I'd go Pacheco. He even like the routes were pretty close between Pacheco and McKinnon last week. It was 18 McKinnon routes to 16 Pacheco. Now McKinnon turned those 18 routes into 8 targets, whereas Pacheco had 0 targets on 16 routes. So I think Mahomes, like you can kind of tell when McKinnon's in the game, Mahomes is looking his way. When Pacheco's in the game, his route running does not look very competent. I don't think he has many
Right,
receivers.
they're different players.
Yeah, but I still think, yeah, just for the carries, the goal line usage, I would rather have Pacheco. Now, if we're talking if we're talking the playoff format, and this is more just like a gut feel take than analytics, I would actually lean McKinnon over Pacheco for a
Because of what
couple
they
of
did
reasons.
last year.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I think two main reasons for that. One, I think there is some possibility the team is just sort of protecting McKinnon for the playoffs. We saw last year him really go off in the playoffs, and even when CEH was healthy, they just completely iced CEH for McKinnon. He got the rushing and the receiving workload in a couple games, so that's one reason. Number two, they're more likely to be in passing scripts in the playoffs than they are in the regular season. So when they go up against the Bills, if they play the Bengals, these teams they're going to need to score a lot of points. So I'm expecting McKinnon to get heavier snap shares in those playoff games, assuming they're going up against some high powered offenses in the playoffs. Do you agree with that, McKinnon over Pacheco for the playoff formats?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
It feels like something that like we both know that it's not like we have solid data to back that up. We just know that's what they did last year. So seems like the most probable outcome is that they do it again.
Yeah. I agree with that. Let's see here. I think another thing people will be talking about is the San Francisco running back situation. We have McCaffrey moving pretty far to the right on this chart, and that's mainly influenced by two things: by his first week in San Francisco, where he had a very limited role. That week is reflected in this data. It's also a little bit because of last week, where McCaffrey saw more of a committee with Elijah Mitchell back in the fold. We had Elijah Mitchell getting a decent snap share. He had 24 snaps out of 71, so almost a 30% snap share, with McCaffrey at 47 out of 71, so more of like a 60% snap share. I think, and curious what you think, I'm not overly concerned about this. I think when you see the box score, it looks kind of scary that Mitchell got 18 carries, but McCaffrey still had 5 targets. He still had 14 carries of his own. He was getting all the routes out of the backfield. This is no longer the McCaffrey on the Panthers role. It's just more your sort of average workhorse or semi workhorse role on another team, but on a much more efficient offense. So yeah, I don't know. Like you're not
Not
getting the
worried,
legendary.
but the situation is a little bit worse. Like he's a 49er now.
Yeah.
So he's gonna have the 49er kind of like profile. And probably where there's so many good players on their team, which is why they're so efficient, or partly why. that it's probably you're not going to get every game via McCaffrey shown now, or at least that's what seems likely. But you're still going to get some very strong games. But I think it's also a situation where it's really hard to be too confident either way what's going to happen. Like, I'm placing a fair bit of weight on the fact that they really liked Elijah Mitchell last year, and when he's back healthy, they're giving him like a fair share of the workload, and I think it's kind of like pretty likely that they continue to give him that, but at the same time, the whenever you talk about the 49ers, it's really hard to call it one way or the other.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel similarly. I think I expect a similar snap share breakdown. I do think that the fact Mitchell got 18 carries on 24 snaps is a little bit fluky, due to the positive game script a little bit there. But yeah, I guess like you have to say last week was a negative to McCaffrey. The fact that Mitchell took sort of that 33% snap roll and took a decent bit of carries, but almost every running back in the league sees like some running back on their team take a third of the snaps. So yeah,
but if you drafted McCaffrey 101 and someone tells you, oh well, another running back is getting 35% of the snaps, your camera got a little weird, by the way.
Yeah,
that's good. You dropped them 101 and someone tells you that, then you're disappointed. So it is like you said, it is a negative, but still a very startable player.
Yeah. Still, I think I would still be. Yeah, I would probably still have McCaffrey in my top 3 or so. Maybe someone like Eckler and Barkley, I would probably rather have, but I think McCaffrey is still up there for me for the receiving usage. And yeah, we're just one week off of his 40-point fantasy game on the 49ers. So
are you still taking him over Justin Jefferson?
In PPR, no. I don't think I would take him over Jefferson. I don't think I would take him over Diggs or Tyreek either. I don't think I would take any running backs over those 3, to be honest.
That's fair, for sure.
Yeah.
In that type of year.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Speaking of wide receivers, let's keep things moving. I don't think there's too many interesting. I guess like just a couple quick notes. Jeff Wilson, again, dominated snaps last week. I think it's sort of a 60-40 split with Mostert. So he's a guy, if you can catch your league mates sleeping, try to send some type of package deal where you get Jeff Wilson thrown in. I think he's a really strong buy now and also for the fantasy playoff formats.
Agreed.
Yeah. But besides that, let's move on to wide receiver. Yeah, well,
next or do you want to talk about this?
No, let's keep going to wide receiver. I'll send these charts. So I do think, just for people following along, I did do the expected fantasy points charts for running back, just filtering for the last 5 weeks, and I think they're interesting. But we've already spent a lot of time on running back, so I'll send these out on Twitter for anyone who wants to look at these. It shows things like Eckler with an insane 19 expected fantasy points per game from week 6 to week 10. That's ridiculous. Ramondre in a legendary workload type role. There's some cool stuff here on this chart to check out, but I think we got to
spend so long talking about running backs. Pete is logging back into StreamYard to cut off our access, kick us off the stream, and stat chasing will be done by new hosts next week.
Yeah, we've been fired for talking about Elijah Mitchell for 20 minutes. That's a real shame. Okay, wide receiver. By Pete's decree, we are looking at here wide receiver opportunity versus fantasy points for wide receivers that have run more than 85% of their team's routes. On the chart here, we have fantasy points per game on the y-axis. On the x-axis, weighted targets per route run. So these is number of targets you get per number of routes run, but adjusted for your average depth of target. So a short screen is worth less than a 40-yard bomb downfield. So on this chart here, again, this chart is another one that's been pretty stable. We now have 10 weeks of data.
We did get a promotion for Steph Diggs. I think that's pretty notable, actually.
Yeah, can you talk through what you're referring to there with Diggs?
So Diggs, for a lot of this was on the second chart. He was below before. He was below 85% of routes run, and now he's above, which is I mean, he's such a strong pick. We were just talking about him being one of the first, like, I don't know, like 3 or 4 picks. So it's hard for him to go higher, but that just it just adds to the floor. It gives him an even higher floor than before. That he's running even more an even higher percentage of routes than he was at the start of the year.
Yep. Yeah, I don't have a good reason for why he was at less than 85% and now why he's crept up. Maybe he was dealing with some minor conditioning or health thing earlier in the year and they've just ramped him up. Either way, good to see him in that category now. And yeah, this chart, I think it's pretty clear if you look at the top right of this chart, who the elite contingent of wide receivers are. I think you can throw Chase, Jefferson, Kupp, who's now in IR, Hopkins, Diggs, Adams, and maybe Lamb and AJ Brown, maybe slightly below those guys. But this chart pretty clearly shows the players who are getting a massive opportunity, and the two that are maybe missing from here that you would consider in that would be Tyreek and Waddle. They're just on the next chart because they have less than 85% of their team's routes. But this chart does a really good job of highlighting sort of the elite roles in the NFL. And yeah, so I think one thing I want to talk about here, Connor, was the Cooper Kupp situation. He's going to go on IR for 4 weeks. I wouldn't be surprised if he's out even longer or if they shut him down for the full year, just based on where the Rams are in the standings right now. They could be ruled out from the playoff hunt at that point. So the guys running behind him are Allen Robinson, Van Jefferson, and Bennett Skowronek. In a league where, say, you're desperate for a flex or wide receiver starter, and these guys are available on the waiver wire, do you have any lean on how the wide receiver room for the Rams is gonna shake out?
I think it's just gonna be terrible, to be honest. Like, I hate saying it like this, but these are all just below NFL average players. Like, even Higbee is not he's below average receiver at the NFL level. So that suggests, and then you have their struggles in the running game. The easy answer for me, or the quick answer, is I just think it's going to be none of them. The offense is going to suck. But that's a little bit of a cop out. Probably, I guess, if I had to pick somebody, it probably is Allen Robinson. Just because he does have some pedigree. And Skowronek is kind of like the dictionary definition of a jag. But I don't know if I can do a lot better than that. Maybe even Van Jefferson coming off the injury, like I'm struggling to see how he performs well now that the offense, I guess, if the offense creators, how does that give him enough kind of room to operate or run deep if the offense just isn't on the field as much anymore?
Yeah, I think it's kind of a disaster. And you also have Stafford hurt. Wolford played last week. I think I'm kind of with you that it's more a stay away than like some massive contingent upside for one of these guys. I agree. If I was to pick, I'm going Robinson over Skowronek. I think you can rule it down to those two just based on routes. And Skoronix, Robinson, we've made fun of his cardio specialist ability out there, but Skoronix done even worse, as you see on the next chart. He's at around 30% weighted targets per route run, one of the worst of the 75 to 80% route players. So he's earning even less targets than Robinson. I think some of the designed short area stuff that Kupp gets a ton of will go to Robinson. I think they're more likely to design plays for him. So, if you're telling me like Allen Robinson versus Thielen rest of year, I would rather have Robinson because of this Kupp injury. I think I'd rather have him than a guy like Mooney or DPJ. So I think that's sort of the range I'm talking about, like a high-end wide receiver 4, low-end wide receiver 3. I think is kind of how I'm viewing Robinson, but it's not a guy with a ton of upside. I don't think it's just, someone who can get you 6 catches for 62 yards and maybe a touchdown. I think at this point in his career, he's not getting you a ton more than that on a weekly basis.
So if you don't mind, if I go back to our kind of like playoff basketball team, one of the teams that in 538, they have a pretty high expected game number for the Cowboys, 95% to make the playoffs, 2.2 expected games, and the highest is the Chiefs at 2.7. So the 538 are telling us that the Cowboys are a team that we should be interested in for this tournament. Well, assuming we buy that, we can maybe talk about if we buy it or not. I see that CD Lamb is definitely not at a discount at ADP of 14, but Michael Gallup is pick 47, which is that's pretty late for the wide receiver 2 on a team with that high playoff equity. But we see on this chart that despite getting a pretty solid weighted targets per out run, his points have been terrible. How are you looking at Michael Gallup?
Yeah, he's a guy that I think is interesting, and I've been in some home leagues where he's available on waivers. I'm trying to get him this week. I think with these guys coming off ACL tears, we generally see them ramp up throughout the course of the year. And like you said, his target opportunity is pretty strong. It's in the range of guys like Pittman, Devonta Smith, Debo, DJ, some guys that have, had some strong performances. So I'm interested in Gallup. You're right. The inefficiency has been on a per target basis has been awful so far, but I'm willing to bet that it sort of regresses to his career averages, and he becomes a useful sort of flex piece down the stretch. And yeah, like you said, in the playoff formats, I think he's an interesting guy to add late for your Dallas stacks. I guess the other thing is like OBJ is a bit of a wild card there, right? I think OBJ could sort of steal Gallup's role potentially. There's been a lot of rumors there, so that's maybe the risk on investing a ton in Gallup, is that someone like OBJ comes in. But I'd still put that at less than 50% chance of happening, maybe around 50 if I was just to wing a probability there.
So with the playoff question and him being such a strong value relative to the other Cowboys, how would you make him part of like a Dallas like super stack, because like that's an easier way to draft for Cowboys? Or would you prefer to maybe do it like not a skinny, but like two Cowboys players at a cheaper value? How would you play that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, and maybe this is a cop out. I think both are viable. I think I'm more likely though to take Gallup on teams where I have the Cowboys making a deep run. So maybe more like Cowboys super stacks where I'm taking Dak, I'm taking Pollard, I'm taking Lamb, and I'm betting that the Cowboys are going to make it to the Super Bowl. In that scenario, I probably want some fourth piece there. Whereas, like, if I'm just taking two players from a team, oftentimes you're okay with those two players just having one or two big weeks and then losing in the conference championship or something. And, if I'm only getting Cowboys players from 1 or 2 weeks, I think it's less likely that, Gallup gets there on a massive spike week and wins you a week. I think he's more likely to be a guy that matters in that format because he just gets successive like 9 to 15 point weeks that help you advance and help you in the final week. But yeah, that's just sort of off the top of my head. Do you have any thoughts there?
To be honest, no. It was just a question I had.
Yeah.
And was curious what you thought about it. I think I tend to agree that he's definitely an attractive fourth piece. And yeah, I agree with how you put that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Good point from Stephanie here. I wasn't thinking about this. James Washington will be back soon for Dallas. I still think Gallup is the wide receiver the team invested very heavily in this offseason. He got a pretty big contract. He's been running ahead of Noah Brown now, if you look at last week's snaps. So I expect Washington to compete with Brown for the wide receiver role. I don't really expect him to be taking snaps from Gallup, especially coming off a pretty major injury himself. But that's a good note. James Washington is someone we should keep on our radar, see how he affects the snaps when he comes back. Let's move on here to the next wide receiver chart. I didn't have a ton to say here besides Darius Slayton is the wide receiver 1 on the Giants. I think that's pretty clear now. And he had a pretty big spiked week last week as far as Giants wide receivers go. So he's a guy I'm adding in more casual leagues where he's still on the wire. Aside from that, kind of same old here for these wide receivers. Yeah, any thoughts? Any thoughts on any of these guys?
Nothing is really jumping out to me. Just gonna check where T Higgins maybe is interesting.
Yeah.
In the playoff format, it kept going at ADP 49. That's one of those things where like the Bengals are like one of those lower probability teams.
Yeah.
But if they do make it, we've seen them. We saw them make a run last year, and we've seen how important T Higgins can be for the team. But I would count that as kind of like a more of a minor point.
Yeah,
I don't have any kind of like strong takes or takeaways from this chart that we haven't talked about before.
Yeah, that's fair. I think a guy who's not on this chart, but we should talk about is Kadarius Toney for the Chiefs. So I think he wasn't actually going to be due for a major role last week, and then Juju went down, and that pushed him into a much higher snap role.
Mecole Hardman was down too.
And Mecole Hardman was down too. So that's a good point. I think, I think this requires like really monitoring the Chiefs' injuries to both Juju and Hardman. Neither of their injuries sound like something that is going to keep them out for too long. So it's interesting. If you look at the snaps last week, there was a total of 40 routes for the Chiefs. MVS led the team with 34 routes, then Watson at 29, and then Toney and Juju down at 17 and 16, Sky Moore all the way down at 10. I think that Watson and MVS are less talented than Juju, Toney, and Hardman, but I don't know if you can play Hardman, Juju, and Toney on the field together. I think none of them are really like proven as outside wide receivers in the NFL. So I want to say that Watson and MVS could be pushed to the side and you could get, Toney, Juju, and Hardman out there. But I don't think the Chiefs will do that. I think you'll still see a lot of Watson and MVS. So yeah, I want to be more excited about Tony, and I think in playoff formats I am, but for this regular season stuff, I still expect him to have like more of a 50%. Even with the Juju out for half the game and Hardman out last week, he didn't even run 50% of the team's routes. So um, I don't know. I think I would still probably project him for the regular season at like a 50 to 60% routes roll. And maybe in the playoffs that spikes even more. But yeah, I don't want to be the cold towel or whatever the expression is on Tony guy, but
Wet blanket.
yeah, wet blanket, cold towel. Yeah. Any thoughts on Tony? Like, how do you see his snaps evolving throughout the year? If you're to sort of guess there.
That's a hard one. I think if I was to make the case for it going higher, it would be that when they used him a lot when he was on the field,
Yeah.
and he performed with it, and so that would be maybe the case of where you might say, okay, these other players they've struggled a bit, and then Tony he's played better with the snaps that he has, so that could maybe be the case for him to be closer to a full-time player. But yeah, Tony is a hard one for me to read. He's a hard. It's one of those gut things where, he's he always seems to have these question marks of like availability and stuff like faking the hamstring to get off the team, with the Giants, which is kind of what he told us with a celebration. Uh, that sort of stuff is kind of like it's a bit of a red flag for me. He had issues in college with availability. Yeah, that's where I always struggle with Tony. But the problem is that he's so good that if I'm wrong and the enthusiasts are correct and he does have this good year, then he could smash so hard.
Yeah. It seems like a situation where like the median projection doesn't look great for Tony just because of concerns on playing time and maybe some off the field health stuff. But he has clearly the most upside, I think, of any Chiefs wide receiver. I think I would only take Juju above him for rest of season in fantasy. I definitely like him over MVS, Hardman, whoever else. And yeah, maybe even I think he has more pure upside than Juju, but Juju's 50 to 95% outcomes or maybe still better than Tony's is how I would maybe look at it. So
yeah, I think that's very fair.
Yeah. Okay, let's finish up on tight ends here. Starting with the starting tight ends, if you want to call them that. We're looking here at tight end utilization and efficiency. So tight ends with greater than 60% of routes run from weeks 6 through 10. We also have targets per route run and ADOT shown on this chart, so you can look at to see if tight ends are being used down the field. Like Kyle Pitts, ADOT of 14.4. That's really high for a tight end. Greg Dulcich, 13.7. That's really high for a tight end. Versus guys that are being used in more sort of short dump off roles, like Dallas Goedert, 5.1 ADOT. Hayden Hurst, 5.4 ADOT. So some differences there. I'll call out a couple of things that I noticed right away. Number one, I think Foster Moreau is a tight end one as long as Darren Waller is out. He's maybe not the most exciting guy from an athletic standpoint, but he has the full-time role there. That's pretty clear. And he's got a decent targets per route run, okay, middling ADOT. Not someone I'm super excited about, but I think he's definitely, on the low end tight end one bubble as long as Waller is out. Yeah. Any thoughts on some of the other guys on this chart?
Yeah.
Connor. Yeah.
So the first thing that struck me here, was the Trey McBride popping in our
Yep.
top 7 or so of route run, and I will say that's held up quite a lot by the last game, week 10, when what's his name, Zach Ertz got injured, and so
Yeah,
uh,
sorry. I actually, just to be clear, this I did a manual change just to only show McBride from last week, just to sort of
okay,
compare. Yeah,
okay,
yeah. So
because
this is just
that's kind
yeah,
of like the closest that we can get to what we should project forward,
yeah, yeah.
and so that makes sense, um, and I think that's also relevant when we look at the targets per route run, and that we're only looking at what is it, 36 routes uh, sample size. So
Yeah.
4%, he got one target on those, uh, or maybe the target per route run is
So the target per route run is actually for the full year. So that is actually an accurate targets per route run for him for this whole year. It's just been really really bad for McBride, but still a low amount of routes. I can, as you continue to
okay.
talk through McBride, I can pull that up.
Okay.
So that,
So
yeah, he does have 4% targets per route run over the whole season.
and that is based on
58 routes. He has 3 targets on 58 routes this season. Okay. So like
and
5%. Maybe, yeah. I'm not sure where that number says for, but it's low, whatever it is.
yeah, so I've got 4 targets on 90 routes. So that's where we're getting our 4%.
Oh, okay. Got it. Okay.
So that's obviously pretty poor. Um, I think that's for someone like me. I was really excited about McBride going into the season. He had this great receiving profile in college. It was excited to see what he could do to kind of challenge Zach Ertz as the receiver from the tight end spot. For me, that's obviously a big kind of like reason for caution. Oh, okay, maybe the results here, maybe he's not as good a receiver in the NFL as I thought he would be. Um, so maybe that's a reason for some caution. But I'm still a little bit optimistic that he was so good as a receiver in college, and we're still only talking about 90 routes. That maybe with Zach Ertz down, that the kind of routes that he's running and the role, his overall role, maybe that's more conducive to fantasy points uh, than it was before. So, but definitely that makes me more cautious for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think I'm similar. I'm willing to like give him a little bit of pass on the targets per route run just based on the fact that his role looks to be really strong. He's going to be running all the routes, sort of in the same range as guys like Hawkinson, Pitts, Komet, Dulcich in terms of just of route rates. It's a team that we do expect to be decently pass heavy if Murray is to come back, and now Ertz is out for the year. So the target per route run stuff is not good, but that stuff can, I think, be a bit noisy in such a small sample size.
Right.
We were ripping on Cole Kmet all year as someone who had a really low targets per route run, but he was running all the routes, and all of a sudden he rips off 2 massive spike weeks. So you really just want to target the guys that are running all the routes and sort of cross your fingers. McBride's maybe not flashed the most talent thus far in the NFL, but I think he's still still viable as like a fringe, tight end 1, low end tight end 2. Another thing that I noticed here was Trey McKitty. I think shows up here because Everett got hurt last week. I don't have the latest on Everett's injury, but it looks like last week, pulling up the snap counts now, McKitty ran 31 routes on 44. dropbacks for the Chargers. So that's a pretty high route rate. Everett was down at just 7, so he must have gotten injured.
Yeah, so he got a groin injury, and he's now considered day to day.
Okay, got it. Okay, so that's just something, very deep tight end premium leagues. McKitty is maybe worth a stash. I think you can start him if you're desperate. He looks to be the pretty clear backup to Everett. I think Parham is on IR or also injured. So yeah, that's just maybe a stash to throw out there for those leagues. Yeah. Besides that, didn't have a ton to call out here. Again, Kyle Pitts peripherals continue to be off the charts, and you can cash in your Sklansky bucks on those in your targets per route run leagues. He's absolutely smashing.
Not the most actionable point, but one thing I often hear about George Kittle is that he blocks too much, and you can see here even in the last 5 weeks that have been pretty favorable to him. He has actually blocked a lot, but he plays like almost every snap. So like even though he's blocking like a pretty high percentage of the time, he's also running a lot of routes or a very high percentage of routes. And over the last 5 weeks, he's actually ran the highest percentage of routes out of anyone. And so maybe this is more of a DFS point than anything else, in that when the 49ers go into negative game scripts and have to throw a lot, he is, I mean, I don't know who needs a reminder of this, that in those scenarios, George Kittle can put up a lot of points.
Yep. Totally agree there. I think Kittle is a good DFS play. I think people are probably sleeping on him in terms of ownership, just with how many sort of, dud games he's had in a row, or just games where he hasn't made a big splash. So that's a good note there. Let's finish off here with everybody's favorite chart, the backup tight ends. I did a ton of film this week on these guys. Didn't have a lot to share. I will say Chig Okonkwo, I think I've said this 3 weeks in a row, so people are probably familiar, but he just rips off like big plays every game. So I don't know why they can't get him on the field more. That passing offense is really struggling. I think, I'm still not adding him probably because that's just too deep. Too deep of an ad in your main event FPG guys leagues most likely, but he is a guy I'm watching that if he were ever to jump out to like 50% routes or something like that, if you see that start to go up, I'm excited about him. But yeah, other than that, I'm not sure there's any injury situations, anything like that to discuss for these backup tight ends. You got anything, Connor?
Not really, no. I'm wondering why, Tyler Higbee is on the second page here.
Did he get hurt this week too? Let me look into that. Yeah, I think he did get injured. He only ran 24 routes on 40 dropbacks this week. I think he got banged up, but I'm not seeing much news on it.
You heard it here, folks. Tyler Higbee, his role is getting cut by the Rams for no apparent reason.
Yeah.
Nobody else is talking about this.
Nobody else is talking about this. He did have a neck injury in week 8. That's all I can find. But yeah, man, he started the year in an extremely high role. I mean, I think also what you can see in this chart here, Connor, is that his pass, like he's still on the field for 75% of snaps, but he's pass blocking a lot because I think largely due to the Rams offensive line just sucking. So I think that's part of the story as well, that he's just coming into block. But yeah, he must have, either been injured last week or was just pass blocking a shit ton because his routes.
So this is like a true number actually. Week 8 is impacting it, so that pushed them down to 42%.
Yeah.
But week 10, 65% of routes run. Week 9, 61%. Week
Mhm.
7, 59%. So, and in that time, let's see, pass blocks. He had he had 24 different he had a lot of pass blocks. He's up in the past 5 weeks. He's averaging about a 20% block rate. So he's pass blocking 20% of the time, and he's running a route. Let's call it 80% of the time or 60% of the time. So that's a material change, right? That
Yeah.
I think that's a great call out on the pass block stuff. That we were considering him like an every or close to 80% route guy before, and that's pretty much where he was.
Yeah.
Whereas that's no longer the Tyler Higbee profile. Now he's running way less routes than before. So yeah, that's obviously quite a big concern if you are expecting fantasy points from Tyler Higbee.
Yep. That's a good point. Higby, like I think for a while I would have thought of him in the same tiers like the Hayden Hurst, Evan Ingram, Mike Gesicki, Dawson Knox types. He's clearly no longer in that tier. I think he's definitely cuttable in your regular 12 team, leagues in your tight end premium. You can probably even do better than Higby. Like for example, Trey McBride, just based on the routes info, I would definitely take Trey McBride over Tyler Higbee. Just I think a lot more upside in that offense, just due to the routes. So that's a good note. Some
Why you
other.
stay listening to Stat Chasing until the end?
Yep.
That might have been the most actionable thing we've said all show, because
Oh,
I don't even hear that anywhere.
Speaking of actionability, I was just going to break down the Giants tight end situation. Lawrence Cager actually came out of nowhere and led the Giants in snaps. For anybody desperate enough to start Tanner Hudson, we may or may not have done that in our stat chasing team, which is extremely down bad. Lawrence Cager just completely iced Tanner Hudson. They both ran the same amount of routes, actually. They each just ran 8 of 23, but Cager had 45 snaps to Hudson's 11. So if Bellinger is still out and you're extremely down bad, you probably got to start Cager over Tanner Hudson. But this probably only applies to our stat chasing team, which is just the deadest of dead at this point. So hopefully you can do better than Lawrence Cager. Let's see. I don't think I can force any other takes out on the backup tight ends unless you got something, Connor.
Oh, let me get my list here of backup tight end takes.
Harrison Bryant. We have to talk about.
Thank
We're actually
you.
legally required to talk about Harrison Bryant on every show. So, what's going on? What's going on with Harrison Bryant?
He caught the touchdown, so he scored some points. But Njoku is coming back soon, right?
Njoku should be back soon. Bryant's role was better this week in week 10 than week 9. He was at 32 of 42 routes. He only saw 3 targets, but that's a much stronger route rate than we saw the week before. I don't know if that was like a game plan specific thing or what, but if Njoku is out, I think you can fire up Bryant with like a little bit more confidence in desperation spots. But yeah.
Right. If he misses the next game, he's startable with the Harrison Bryant stat chasing money back guarantee.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Any money you lose on Harrison Bryant, you Venmo Pete, just put Harrison Bryant in the description. That's a guarantee. All right. Let's cut this off. A couple Couple sort of logistics things. We're hopefully going to be trying to continue to do playoff best ball streams going forward. Those I think we'll mostly try to do Monday, but things will move around there a bit TBD on that scheduling. But yeah, as we get close to the real NFL playoffs, I know that format gets really popular. So we're going to continue to do some content around that. And if you didn't get to see it yesterday, check out my stream with Pat, which is hopefully pretty evergreen for macro strategy on playoff best ball. And we also put together a couple teams there live. So that's definitely worth a watch. Yeah, Connor, any last notes or plugs before we head out here?
No, nothing really from me. Thanks for joining us, everyone. And really enjoying doing this every week. And thanks for going on the journey with us.
Yeah, thanks. Appreciate everyone who joined live in the chat. That was a lot of fun. We will see you next week in week 12. Good luck in week 11, everybody.